Okay, so we are starting. So our final talk today, our closing keynote, Andrew Clay SHAFER, coming all the way from the United States. Thank you for being with us today, Andrew.
Thank you for
looking
inviting
forward.
me. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, looking forward for your keynote. Okay.
We're done? Oh, that's all? Oh, okay.
So.
All right, so I'm supposed to talk for 2 hours, right? Who's ever been to an open space? So the only reason DevOps Days exist is so I could have open space. That's my whole motive. So I hope you'll stay and join for the open space. So it's my honor to be here. I think this is a beautiful city. I wasn't sure I could be here until about 30 days ago, but he kept asking me, and so here we are. So I'm gonna say some words, and by the end of it, I hope I've made you laugh, and I hope I've made you think. I made a lot of slides. I have 165 slides. Not that each one's going to take very long. And I'm going to speak in English because I don't have any Turkish, but it's going to be fun. So this is the title, Elemental DevOps. I've given a similar talk before with the same title, but this is actually totally different, except not. All right, so this is the alternative title for this talk. You know this saying in the English? WTF, yes? All right, so first a word from my sponsors, who I'm very happy pay my expense reports. I work for a company called Pivotal, and our mission is to transform how the world builds software. All right, I'm glad that's over. My mission, Andrew's mission, is to transform how the world operates software. And I'm not going to give this slide too much time, but I basically feel like I spent the last decade focused on trying to help people do better with better tools and better processes. So part of this is about DevOps Days. To me, the Velocity Conference, which I'm going to mention, I was also involved in Puppet and OpenStack and Cloud Foundry and Kubernetes to some degree, and I wrote a book about web operations back in the day. So this is actually a very important slide because it's my Twitter handle. And this is the most effective way to get my attention, even if you're a coworker and have my email. Direct messages on Twitter are the most effective. And then also, very important information, Andrew comes in various configurations of hair and beard. So you might see me at some point in the future with a different configuration of hair and beard, but it's still the same monster, so don't be afraid. All right, so going back, we're going to tell some stories about the past, the romanticized past. Anyone know who that is? Are you my DevOps? So this hat, this headdress that he's wearing, this came from the, I'm probably going to pronounce it poorly, but Yenicheri, which is a thing from the past, right? I like to learn about a place when I go to a place. So I started reading about Istanbul and about the history of Turkey and the empire. So if you know the story about being Yenicheri, it probably sucked. It was like really bad. And initially, the first Yenicheri were actually slaves. So they're slave soldiers. And it sucked really bad. They're basically born or taken very early and made through discipline and beating to be soldiers. But then, at some point, it changed. And it became desirable. And the Yenicheri were very powerful, which is interesting to think about that dynamic. But this is, I'm going to come back to this quote in another context, but I just want to read it. So while they advanced their own power, this is the English version, or the anglicized version, the Janissaries also helped to keep the systems from changing in other progressive ways. And according to some scholars, the core was most responsible for the political stagnation of Istanbul. It's very interesting. And I read it on Wikipedia, so it's probably true, right? So seriously, all right, where were we? Back to this. I don't know either. But I know it when I see it. And this is what I think is the most important DevOps stuff. I'm being somewhat serious here. Because if we believe it's about communicating, collaborating, you should learn how to read You should learn how to write. You should learn how to speak in your language. And you should follow me on Twitter. So I think you probably know what TLDR means if you use the internet. But it means too long didn't read. So this is the too long didn't read version of DevOps for me is the way to improve development. The best way to improve development is to improve operations. And the best way to improve operations is actually to improve development. And why does this actually matter? Who cares? Like when we keep talking about DevOps, like what's actually important? Well, one word, software. Right? This is what's changing everything. And TLDR, you're building a software company, dun dun dun, or losing to someone who is. This is like super obvious, right? People say this, software's eating the world, and you see this in your lives, right? You see this in, I can land in the airport, although I heard it's illegal, I can push a button on my phone, and Uber will come and get me and drive me anywhere in the city. And that's pretty awesome. And you couldn't do that 10 years ago. And then in 2018, at least with the buzzwords of the day, you're going to be continuously DevOpsing microservices, or you're going to lose to someone who is. Like if you don't have this capability to iterate rapidly on your software, then someone who could do that will probably beat you. And then just to kind of make this at least frame how I think of the world, these are the same thing. So continuous delivery, DevOps, microservices, cloud, serverless, like all this stuff kind of flows together in a way that is super obvious if you step back and look at it. And everyone's touching it in different places and like getting excited about the thing that they're optimizing their life for. And at least for the sake of this conversation, I'm just going to put all of that in this umbrella of cloud native. And I actually use this word cloud native way before the Cloud Native Computing Foundation existed. So if you want to talk about this, now they're adding, oh yeah, and culture matters too, to the definition. So you just should have read what I wrote in the first place and we wouldn't have to wait there. So at the end of the day, these are just words, right? These are words. So we're going to talk about words, but if the words don't mean something, then what do we have? And just as a word of warning, if you're planning a DevOps transformation that's separate from your microservices or your continuous delivery or your Agile, then this thing, yeah. Ugh, that's the face, yeah. So we get the DevOps we deserve. I think this like let that soak in. What we deserve is what we're going to get. And no one set out to do these things. No one set out to do these words by themselves. There's actually Darwinian force. You couldn't deliver the things that need to be delivered some other way. You couldn't build the Googles, the Netflixes, other ways, right? And we just saw a talk about Kubernetes. So I'm going to come back to that Kubernetes theme in a minute too. But let's not focus on the words. Let's focus on the results. Focus on the outcomes. So now, this is the last TLDR before we get to the long part. You're going to build a learning organization, or you're going to lose to someone who is. And what does that mean? Well, learning, first of all, is the only sustainable advantage. Everything else, the change will overtake you at some point if you can't learn and change your behaviors, and then that's the key. You haven't learned anything until you change your behaviors. If you learn the words, but you don't change your behaviors, you didn't actually learn. You just collected information. Right? And this is easy to prove if you're talking about a sport or talking about a musical piece, right? If you can play the music, then you learned. If you can't play the music, you should keep practicing, right? If you can win the game of chess at a certain level, then you learned, and you know when you learned because you could beat someone at higher level, right? It's very easy to measure. It's not always so easy to measure in our organizations, but I will state this, that there's no such thing as a digital transformation without a people transformation. And it's really about these social technical systems that are software and humans, right? So it's about the human performance and experience being optimized with software. And I feel this viscerally. I feel like I've lived this, and certainly some of these tools that we talk about are part of this. But everything that can be optimized by software will be, right? And operations is the secret sauce. So in this equation, operations is actually a huge competitive advantage. But when I say operations, I just don't mean traditional operations. So for a second, we're going to talk about traditional operations. Traditional IT, some of you might work here, is about developers and operators with a wall of confusion between them, and the only way they communicate with each other is through a ticket system, an email. And they don't even see each other as human beings, right? And so that kind of makes people unhappy, or potentially worse, right? Does anyone work here? Anyone ever work there? Yeah, it sucks. And the problem in most cases is we actually set them up, we set people up, we set ourselves up sometimes, where we have incentives that are actually against each other. Because operations is incentivized to keep things stable, and developers are incentivized to make things unstable. It's like literally how they're paid in some cases. And when I say operations is the secret sauce, I'm not the one that said that. I'm not the first one that said this. So this is a blog post from Jesse Robbins, who at the time he wrote this was working at Amazon. He was running operations as the master disaster at Amazon. He wrote this for O'Reilly Radar, and he goes on shortly after this was posted to be a founder of Chef. And so Jesse's argument in this blog post is that in traditional operations, as you scale up, you have more and more work to do. So the color under the graph represents the amount of human toil, the human work to do something. And in the new way, the new secret sauce, so this is 2007, so Puppet's kind of a thing, Chef's not quite a thing, CF Engine's like this old thing people sort of use. Then this graph, at least the way Jesse's framing the world, there's less work if you do things this new way. So DevOps isn't a word yet in 2007, but this is definitely a DevOps conversation. And this has only changed more, right? So the tools that we have available in 2018 will crush this graph compared to what you could do in 2007. So just to frame this in the timeline, and this is also someone from Amazon. So when we start talking about cloud natives, I think it's hard to discount Amazon, right? Amazon, Netflix, Google, like these are the ones that live and walk and talk this. So I'm just going to read this out loud. This is a quote from a 2006 interview with Werner Vogels. The traditional model is that you take your software to the wall that separates development and operations and throw it over and then forget about it. Not at Amazon. You build it, you run it. This brings developers into contact with the day-to-day operation of their software. It also brings them into day-to-day contact with the customer. This customer feedback loop is essential for improving the quality of the service. And this is DevOps before it's a word, right? So this is something that emerges from the practice inside these organizations. It's not something that we invented. It was Darwinian and had to be this way, or you couldn't build Amazon. And I think I'm going to bring this point back more than once, but people get really fixated on the tools, but they don't get fixated on trying to build the same organizations. Right? Build the organization that build the thing instead of trying to like copy the tools. And also there's this constant feedback loop. Everything's about feedback loops. Feedback loops, feedback loops, feedback loops. And why does this matter? Well, this I'm stealing from my friend Liz DeGray, who works at Google Cloud. Software's long-term cost is actually in the operations and maintenance. And it's actually super easy to do the math that if it's not free to run your software and you let it run, it costs more money. So at some point in time, the amount of money that it costs to run it will dwarf whatever it costs to develop it. But that's not the way that we focus in a lot of organizations, and we give the right emphasis. So it behooves us, if we're in these organizations, to drive down the cost of operations more than it does to like push more features, broken features out the door. I don't know why people don't do this. It's super obvious. It's right there in the study, right? The academics proved it. So here's another romanticized story from the past. So there's this thing, DevOps days, right? And where does DevOps come from? Well, I already gave you an example of something that is certainly DevOps, at least my definition, before DevOps is a word. So to me, at least for the sake of argument, and I think this is easily proven, it kind of came from this presentation. So there's a presentation at Velocity in 2009, and I'd already been friends with Patrick, and we were already plotting to have a conference at this point. So this is John Allspaw and Paul Hammond giving a presentation at Velocity talking about developers who are a little bit weird, sit closer to the boss and think too hard, and operations who pull levers and turn knobs, are easily excited and yells a lot in emergencies. And this was at 2009 in Santa Clara, 10 deploys per day, right? And this is nothing now. I mean, Amazon's on record deploying once every second across their microservice architecture, but this was mind-blowing for a lot of people in 2009. 10 deploys a day laid out. And I happened to be live tweeting this conference, and I said a bunch of things. One of them, this is the first one I posted that had the hashtag DevOps. So don't just say no, you aren't respecting other people's problems. Right, so this is before DevOps is a word, but now it's a word all of a sudden, right? So 2009 at Velocity. And there's a bunch of these. And you can go read them. I'm not going to read them all right now. But they're basically the same stuff we talk about still. And there's Patrick. And that's awesome. And now we're here. And since DevOps Days 2009, at DevOps Days, I've talked about cloud, self-service deployment, security and compliance, continuous delivery, systems thinking, immutability, infrastructure as code, microservices, observability, chaos engineering. All those things I talked about and more before 2012. Right, so in some ways everything that needed to be said about DevOps was already said a long time ago. But here we are, saying more words. But what we actually need, and what I need from you, and myself some days, is more walking the talk. It's not just about talk. It's not about words. It's about doing. It's about actions, right? And here's a little quote that you might recognize from a moment ago. While they advance their own power, operations also help to keep the system from changing in other progressive ways. And according to some scholars, operations was most responsible for the stagnation in IT. Anyone work with those people? and everything's changing, right? So we have hardware. You know, some people actually manage data centers, but we're moving to this world where we have software-defined infrastructure, software-defined platforms, and software-defined software, right? But all those have ops. Like the idea that ops goes away is actually ridiculous. And the idea that anything's like going to kill operations just means you have no idea what you're talking about. Because what's happening here is operations is moving up the stack, right? And if you are going to run a serverless platform, then you better hope whoever provides that for you has some notion of DevOps, or like you're doomed, right? Maybe you're a developer and you don't want to worry about infrastructure and configuring servers, and that's great, but someone somewhere better care that that stuff works, that stuff's working, that stuff's configured, right? So if serverless kills DevOps, the only way that happens is because it literally bores me to death when you say that. So here's my definition of DevOps in 2010. So a bunch of us wrote blog posts back in the day. I said everything that needed to be said about DevOps at the time, but here we are still. We keep saying it. So this is me, 2010. Developers and operations can and should work together. Controversial, I know. Number two, and I think this is only continuing to get more and more true and more better, right? System administration is evolving to look more like software development. So in 2010, I can write an API to provision machines. I can write an API to configure machines. I can write an API to monitor my machines. Like writing APIs looks suspiciously like software development. So I could take all the tools and tricks I learned as an agile software developer and apply that to my operations, right? So this is sort of the beginning of the primordial DevOps conversation. And then last but not least, and I think this is in some ways the most important, and why I'm willing to get on aircraft and come to places like Istanbul, is that this is a global community of practice. And while everything that needed to be said about DevOps might have been said in 2012, we didn't have everyone in the room, right? We didn't have everyone in that global community. But the fact that I have friends that are inside of these organizations that have solved these problems, that have used these tools, that lets me solve problems that I wouldn't be able to solve as fast or as effectively by myself, starting from first principles, right? So I can meet people at a DevOps Days. I can join that community of practice, and that raises the level of everyone. And every time I get an idea or I solve a problem, then hopefully everyone in my network will benefit from that going forward. So this is important. And then we already saw this earlier, and I'm going to focus on this for a bit because I actually got kind of frustrated with people saying this. So DevOps, you know, I like calms because that actually is a word that makes sense to me more than clams. But Damon and John said this on a podcast, and on some level it's like, it sounds great. Culture, it's about automation, about lean, metrics, sharing. Who doesn't want that? You know, this is like amazing. It's like pandas vomiting rainbows. Who doesn't want that? Let's do that. Except I still don't know what that means. When someone says culture to me, I have no idea what that means. It's like not an actionable thing. I can't go like do culture. You can't go do automation. There has to be more concreteness to it. So I don't know what it means, and I don't know what I'm supposed to do now. But I don't know if I'm going to solve that problem today. I don't know if I'm going to answer that question today, but I'm going to give you more questions by the end of it. So this is my formulation of this notion of what I call the 5 elements. So culture, automation, lean, metrics, and sharing. I'm going to run through a bunch of stuff really fast, and then we're going to have a big finish, and we're going to do our open space, because that's why I'm really here. All right, so culture. What is it? Culture eats strategy for breakfast. I still don't know. Right, so what is that? This is like a very famous American management consultant. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. I don't know what it eats for lunch or dinner, and I still don't know what to do. Right, so this is like just platitudinal blather. Doesn't help me. So this actually helps me a little bit. Helps me make comparisons. So I'm going to try to have this spectrum of comparisons for every one of the elements. So this is from the Western Topology of Culture, sort of a compressed version of it. This is also in the DevOps Handbook and the Lean Enterprise and a bunch of these other books that kind of touch on these topics. But the idea here is that things on the left are worse than things on the right. So on the left, you have, and you know it's bad, at least if you understand the English word, the left is called pathological. So that's the clue, this bad. And the right is called generative, which means to create. So on the left, you have low cooperation. I hope everyone would agree low cooperation is not as good as high cooperation. On the left, you have messengers shot. On the right, you have messengers trained. A really quick story. I was in China, and I showed this slide, and then we had a discussion because people were confused about messenger shot, and they're like, we don't understand what that means. I'm like, well, you shoot the messenger, and then they die. And they're like, oh, you mean kill them? Because if you shoot them, they might not die. I was like, oh yeah, of course. Okay. So it's the same sort of thing, though. In an organization that's high-performing, you have people sharing the risk, taking responsibility. In the low-performing pathological organizations, no one's held accountable, there's no risk, everyone blames everyone else, right? So when we start talking about blameless postmortems and this kind of stuff, this is a representation of where cultures are, right? Or where you're able to express things inside of your culture. And I think, at least from the position of innovation's important, like we all keep talking about innovation and digital transformation, blah, blah, blah. In an organization where novelty is crushed, you're probably not going to be innovating very much, right? So if your goal is to innovate, but you have a pathological culture, you're not going to be able to. And I would say, and at least in the US, most organizations that are enterprises are pathological. They're bureaucratic at best, and very, very few people work in generative cultures. Truly. So here's a little trick that I learned, which is aligning incentives and interests, right? So we talked a bit about the wall of confusion and how developers and operators might have different interests. If you can align them with each other, and especially with a higher mission, maybe like building a product, then things go better. And one of the biggest things that I see as a determination in organizations, especially with respect to DevOps, doesn't necessarily fix everything else in the organization, is when they start to frame IT as a competitive advantage, as a weapon. So if you look at the way the spend happens at the cloud providers, the true cloud natives, Amazon, Google, whatever, and you can read their books, they're all public companies, the amount of money that they spend on IT is I mean, it's just amazing, right? Like they're saying billions and billions and billions on dollars on building this. And they're not managing IT with the accountants, right? They're not managing, there's in some organization there's CTOs, CIOs that report to the CFO, the Chief Financial Officer. You think those organizations are going to be competing in a cloud native innovation contest? No chance. So if your IT is a cost center, that's a self-fulfilling prophecy. So let's move on to automation. So I used to think automation was important. I still think automation is important. What I've come to believe, mostly from the scars, is that architecture is as important, if not more important in some cases. So back in the day, I had my tools, and I would say automate all the things. And I actually said this, I put this on slides. I'm sorry. What ends up happening is you try to automate what's already there, and then you kind of run into problems, and you can't make progress until you revisit the architecture, right? So this is automation, right? Does everyone agree that's automation? This is a manual task. This is not automation. This is automation. right? Because before we had a person, now we got a robot. So we're going to have robots do stuff. So that's automation. And as I already said, what, how, and why you automate is important that you do. So what I see a lot of people doing right now is they're like, we're just going to take our robots and we're going to put them in containers and we're going to let Kubernetes or whatever put them on some infrastructure. And if Tetris has taught me anything, it's that errors pile up and accomplishments disappear. And that's a funny way to say that in a world where you've built something that has like a complicated, stateful dependent, order dependent thing to get set up, now that's the rate limiting step for how fast you can recover, right? That's a limit on how fast you can scale. So if you're not going to revisit these architectures with respect to how they scale and fail, and you think you're just going to put them in a container and that's going to solve all your operational problems, it might solve some of them. It might solve some build and deployment problems, but it's not really going to give you the operational effectiveness that you want, the reliability that you want. And I'm sure some of you have lived this or you're about to. So the main point of that is whenever you have an automation project, you should revisit the architecture. If you don't, it's a huge lost opportunity. All right, so moving on. This is the spectrum, at least my spectrum for automation. So on one side you have toil, people do a lot of work. On the other side you have directed platforms with directed architectures, right? So it's like we make specific choices about what we do in this because they have promises that they will keep with respect to failure and scaling. And we deploy this way, right? In the pathological side or the worst side, people are afraid to touch things, and when you do break, it tends to be catastrophic, where you realize at some point, at some scale, that the chance that something is failing right now is 100%. And so you build systems that can be operating with continuous partial failure, and that you can inject faults into and they don't suffer. Right? There's no disruption of the service when you inject faults. This is the chaos monkey, this is the simian army, right? And is anyone familiar with this, chaos engineering stuff? People talking about it? No one talks about it? Some people talk about it? All right, moving on to metrics. So this is a sentence from a paper about Borg. Does anyone know what Borg is? So Borg is a tool that Google built. It's sort of the great-grandfather of Kubernetes. This is the container scheduler that's run Google for the last 15 years. And in this paper, so I remember in 2008, if you said the word Borg in a room full of Google people, they would all look at each other and then stop talking to you because it was top secret. But now they have a paper and they'll tell you about it. And then now they have Kubernetes and the rest of this stuff. So almost every task running under Borg contains a built-in HTTP server that publishes information about the health of the task and thousands of performance metrics. This is solid gold. I guarantee you right now, you'll get more out of instrumenting your applications to report their health metrics than you will out of whatever fancy container scheduler you want to implement. This is a key, solid gold buried in that paper. So metrics, and I'm going to hammer on Google for a minute. So this is the site reliability hierarchy from the SRE book. Sorry, you probably can't read it because it's little. It says monitoring is the foundation of reliability. Monitoring. Like this is Google telling you how they think about reliability. Monitoring is the foundation. And then there's service level objectives. So does anyone know what service level objectives is? I asked Chris last night, and I explained it to him. And then I told him he had homework. So this service level objectives from Google SRE book, it might be the most impactful thing to come out of Google. Seriously. And if you want to talk about service meshes on Kubernetes, but you can't define SLOs, then I'm just going to make this face again. I'm just going to go like, because this is solid gold, and it actually solves a lot of the alignment and incentives problems, because it gives you a dispassionate way to resolve when you can deploy and when you can't based on the air budget. So I'm giving you homework. So this is the homework. You're going to go read Embracing Risk, Service Level Objectives, and Eliminating Toil, and if you want to, you can read Collaboration and Communication, and you can read it for free. So this is the SRE book. If you just search for SRE book on Google, it will come up. And this is Google's SRE is essentially a concrete implementation of DevOps. It's been available since 2016, and it's free as in beer. And if I keep going to DevOps days and people can't talk about SLOs, this is me next time that happens. Yeah, that's what I'm going to start doing. Because this is something we should just adopt. We should adopt this language. We should adopt this mentality. If you don't understand your objectives for your service, like literally, what the hell are you doing? So this is SRE. It basically checks every box. I'm going to keep advertising until people can have sensible conversations about service level objectives. And then last but not least, and this is we just heard a reference to Steve Jobs, good DevOps copy, great DevOps steal. So steal all the stuff from that book that's good. What are your objectives and how you know you're meeting them? Next time I come to Istanbul, hopefully we can talk about SLOs and it'll make sense to people. And we can have open space about it in a minute. So in the world of the spectrum for metrics, on one side you have things that are unmonitored. Basically, if you want to find out anything about a machine, you SSH into it, and you have like all the terminals with tail -f, and you're like looking through the matrix, and then no, that's an exception, but that's a normal exception, and no, that one's a bad one. Has anyone worked there? No. I have before, I've been there. And monitoring is something that never actually gets done. It's like just not, doesn't come up, right? We got like all this other work to do, and we're too busy doing our work, so we're not going to do monitoring. As you get a little better, the higher performing teams might have monitoring, but it's a secondary consideration. You add monitoring after you put something into production. In the highest performing organizations, the SLIs are defined and built into the application. The devs are instrumenting their application because they have the most context about its health. Right? That's the highest performing. Sharing. All right, so we talked about the global community of practice. Right? We have like some notion of what it means to be excellent. And now we have some notion of what it means to be excellent as a developer and as an operator. And in our organizations, we're going to get rid of the wall of confusion, and we're going to add a new team. And now we have 2 walls. Right? Anyone do this? Don't do that. So this is not a solution. If you get some incremental benefit from adding a DevOps team because you got more focus on your automation and metrics, that's awesome. But it doesn't necessarily it doesn't change the problem of your communication and collaboration. So I'm telling people not to do that, or at least not only do that. So just don't do that. What you actually want to do is recognize that there's all these communities inside of your organization, and each of them has separate expertise and separate skill and separate interests. And so you want to align these skills into teams that are focused on creating that value. So you have communities of interest that are aligned. Developers understand the operators, operators understand the developers. Remember, security is always on the bottom, whatever. So moving on, this is another spectrum for the notion of sharing. So on one side we have things are hidden, no one really shares, everything is a secret, very strong silos. As you move towards the middle, maybe you put things on a wiki and it's searchable. That it still goes on the wiki to die, but at least it's there, right? And then in the highest performing organizations, I see people have relationships and they build personal relationships and they cultivate information that's the right information to help people make decisions. Because too much information doesn't actually help people, right? If you just have like all the metrics, like that's not enough. Like you actually want to help people make relevant decisions based on each of our understanding and expertise. All right, and also join the global community. Thanks for having me. All right, moving on to the last one. And I put Lean last because if you're actually a student of Lean, you realize Lean has all this already. Lean has all of it, right? But the thing that Lean has that I like is this notion of continuous improvement. Continuous improvement. And just to keep the standard of a spectrum, I think that on one side you have teams that are complacent. As you get a little better, maybe you're motivated. But the highest performing organizations, people are there because they're inspired. They go to work inspired. They come home from work inspired. And also because CALM sounds way better than CAM. So I like to add Lean. What are you going to do? I don't know what the hell CLAMS is. So keep going. This is that, same five. Now they mix together, right? Like it doesn't make sense to have like the best automation and no monitoring. It doesn't make sense if you're a generative culture and you don't have like any automation, right? So pathological cultures can be fully automated. Automation could be unmonitored. Metrics can be hidden. Generative cultures can be buried under their toil. And what is good enough today might not be good enough tomorrow. We don't want to stagnate. We want to be continuously learning. Who doesn't want that? Everyone wants the DevOps, right? That's why we're here. We want the DevOps. We want the pandas. We want the rainbows. Well, this is what you actually want. I promise this is what you want. You want scalability, availability, reliability, operability, usability, observability, probably some more ilities and entities. You want it all for free without changing anything. That's what you really want. And just to make that bigger without changing anything. That's what people want. And there's this adoption curve. Like, there's a very famous curve, right? So how people adopt innovation. The innovators and the early majority, the early adopters, early majority, late majority, blah, blah, blah. And there's actually, so I used to get frustrated when I see people and they're, you know, the same thing happened with Agile. It's definitely happened with DevOps, where you see people and they just put the titles, they just change the titles, they just change the words, like now we have a Scrum Master, we do stand-ups and we stop writing documentation, so we're Agile. But they didn't change anything else about how they do projects. And what it turns out, and this is straight from institutionalization theory, is that the early adopters are actually trying to get an advantage. And so they get an advantage because they want an advantage. But at some point, they prove that that's an advantage. And then the late adopters, they actually aren't after an advantage. They want to be legitimized. They want to say that we're Agile and we're DevOps because that's the thing that gets an advantage. It's not real. The motivation is not the advantage. It's to be legitimate. So I'm going to implore you to try to be legitimate, not just try to get an advantage, not try to be legitimate, not just legitimate. Yeah, I want to be legit, but I also want to win. Like, that's why I'm here. That's why this is interesting. All right, so if we have to change, can you tell us exactly what to do? There's everywhere I go, they're like, tell us what to do. We want the steps, the magic steps to do the DevOps. You can't. There's no way to do that. No one can tell you because no one has your context. I can tell you what I've seen. I can tell you what I would try. I can tell you what I would measure. I can tell you what I believe, but I can't believe for you. I can also tell you to read the SRE book, and if I come back and you can't discuss SLOs, you're mad. So the change won't stop. Right? It's not going to stop. These things keep building on each other. So there's innovation on innovation on innovation, right? It's a curve of adoption of innovations crashing on itself. And if you're not prepared for that, it will tip your boat over, right? This is a very famous painting. But what I want to be able to do, what I hope you want to be able to do, is I want to surf the waves, right? I want to pick the waves that I want to surf, and I'm going to be deliberate about it. And it turns out no one can tell you exactly how to surf. If you ever try to do this, it's very difficult. I tried to do it for 2 years, and I barely was able to stand up and start to have fun. You have to feel it. You have to get in the water, and you have to feel it, and you have to be willing to fall. You have to fall down, right? And at some point, the desire to surf must overcome the fear of getting drowned, right? Of getting pummeled by the waves. And if you can do that, you can surf. And here's a warning. Surfing is hard. Also another warning, software is hard. Turns out software is always hard. And people talk about DevOps like it's this amazing thing, pandas, vomiting rainbows. It felt like this to me. It felt like this. It was mud and blood. And this is actually a picture of me trying to manage OpenStack in 2010. So you give them the warning, right? This is the warning. So this is actually something happened in the U.S. It happened in Texas. A man shouts, that alligator, jumps into the lake and is killed by an alligator. And this is actually the guy. Right? So he got warned there was an alligator, but he didn't listen, and he jumped in the water, and then he died. So with that in mind, getting the warning, these are the 5 stages of DevOps I expect you to go through. You've been warned. Denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. That's what you're going to go through. I'm at acceptance now, okay? So this guy. And the desire to make software has to overcome the fear of failing, right? And what I believe DevOps is, or what I define DevOps in 2018, is it's optimizing human performance and experience operating software. With software and with humans. So, are you doing DevOps? I actually don't care. I don't care. Do you have joy? Do you have ease? Do you have love? And do you have results? Are you winning? Do you get an advantage? Because software is hard, but humans is harder. Right? We get focused on tools. The tools are easy. Because it turns out humans are terrible and humans are awesome. Right? Everything that ever happened that we have as recorded history that's terrible and awesome, it was all humans. Right? So I'm going to guess you're probably a human. And the thing I like about humans, my favorite thing about humans, one of the favorite things about myself, is that humans can learn. And I made this point earlier that you haven't learned anything until you change your behavior. Okay? So this is someone you might have worked with before. This is a very famous quote. I don't have time to learn new things because I'm too busy getting things done. This is a quote from the least productive person in the world. Maybe you work with them. So saying DevOps won't fix your pathological culture. It won't fix the lack of vision. It won't align the incentives and interests. What we're trying to do is build software, and software is creative. You're trying to unlock the human potential to create. Software is also complex. It's not digging ditches, right? It's not like building widgets. It's not running a factory. It's closer to art than science. New behaviors are more important than new titles. The principles are more important than the practices, are more important than the tools. The mindset is more important than the skill set, more important than the tool set. Adapt is more important than adopt. Why is more important than what. So if DevOps means configuring servers, DevOps is already dead. And if DevOps means changing our titles and nothing else, then DevOps deserves to die. And if DevOps means continuously learning to optimize systems, especially socio-technical systems that are both technical and humans, then DevOps lives forever. So this is the best method, best methodology. Doesn't matter. Nothing beats this. Smart, motivated people working together. The best methodology. So my call to action for you today is to be smart, to be motivated, to work together, and to change your behavior, to change your behavior, to change your behavior. And I'm probably going to pronounce this very poorly. But I'll say it in English. Thank you.
Çok teşekkürler. Çok teşekkürler.
Thank you. Çok teşekkürler. Kurler.
Great. Yeah.
All right.
So thank you for coming.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So we had some questions, but we don't have time. I think we can discuss them during open space because they are
Open
perfect.
space.
Like,
propose your questions as open space
yes.
questions.
For example, one of the questions is, should companies hire new DevOps guy or grow inside the company? I don't know, this could be a good discussion topic.
Yes. Yes.
Hire or don't hire?
No,
grow
yes.
inside? Both.
Yes.
Okay, just yes. So we're going to start, we're not taking any breaks. We are going to start with the introduction to open spaces, and Andrew is going to...
So there'll be a bit of a chance for a break as we move and start doing the organization.
Yes.
So
Yes.
just bear with us for a moment, and I'll just keep this, and then... So do we have stickies and notepads?
Yes, we are going to prepare them right now.
All right, I'm going to turn this off, or I'll leave it on.
And I can tell some of the details in Turkish.
Okay, so I'm going to explain open space. If you think it needs to be translated, go ahead and translate it. So the point of open space is that everyone that's on this stage has less information in total than everyone in the audience. And so we get up here and we broadcast to you, and that's okay. But what is really the magic of an event like this is building connections and having discussions with peers. Being peers in a circle, talking about topics that are interesting, talking about topics that are relevant. So what we're going to do for the rest of the day is we're going to have an experience that we create together. Right? So this is the part of the program that I think offers the most to us, but it's also the part of the program that asks the most from us. Right? And so I've had people comment that the Turkish people might not be used to having this kind of interactive conversation with each other, but you're not going to let me down, because I bet them that you're going to have a great open space and talk to each other. Okay? So in order for this to happen, the first thing we do, well, first there's only one rule, and then there's a sub-rule. So the one rule of open space is the law of mobility. And what the law of mobility says is if you are not learning or sharing, then you should move. So that's the law for the rest of the time. If you're not learning or you're not sharing, you're in the wrong place and you should move to somewhere else. Then the second sub-law is whoever shows up are the right people. Whatever happens is the only thing that could happen. So if you have some preconceived notion about the conversation you're supposed to have and it doesn't happen that way, that's okay. we're still going to have a great thing, and it's whatever we create together. So whatever experience you have for the rest of the day is 100% your fault, right? And maybe his, Sir Hud, a little bit. So the first part, we're going to propose the topic. So make a cue over here, and where's the stickies? Do you want to translate anything or say anything?
Right now, I will open the presentation.
Okay, so there should be some, what do we want to write on? Sorry, do we have the stickies? Serhat, help me out here. Oh, we're just going to pin them? How do you do agile without stickies? So we're using swords.
Arkadaşlar herkes gelecek, konu önerilerini yazacak buraya. Hani örneğin Andrew demişti işte servis level objektifler hakkında konuşmak istiyorum diyor mesela. Servis level objektif nedir? İşte bunları konuşmak istiyorum diye buraya yazıyor. Çok kısa bir iki cümle burada anlatabilirsiniz, Türkçe'de anlatabilirsiniz, sorun yok. Yazan var. Kağıt dolaştıracağız şimdi aralarda. Daha sonra herkes gelecek, üstüne işte noktalar var orada. Onlardan...
So, original version is law of 2 feet, but in modern, people change it to mobility because not everyone has 2 feet.
Yes, I know. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Tamam.
So,
Evet, masalardaki kağıtlarınızı yazıp da getirip buraya ineleyebilirsiniz de. İlla burada kağıt almanıza da gerek yok ama boş kağıdımız da var.
so I'll propose the first one.
Okay.
So I would like to talk about service level objectives. So if anyone would like to talk about service level objectives, then that would be a conversation we have.